what I'd like to know as the outsider here, right, because I don't work in the food services business, I don't work in HR, I don't work in facilities management, I don't work in any of these areas. But so what I'm coming from the outside is saying, what is the actual purpose of the office or the workplace at this stage? We know what it used to be. If you go back to the industrial age, it was about serried ranks of desks, people being invigilated, managers saying, I need that person in here so I can see what they're doing. It was very much a production efficiency-led operation. That was the origins of it through Taylorism and all these different schools of thought about offices. So we know where we've been, but we don't know as much about where we're going, I suppose. Yep. For you, at this stage of 2023, what is the purpose of the workplace for you? What's the thing it's doing?
In terms of the physical space? Yeah, I mean, I think that's the first thing that's really important to recognize, is that when we use the phrase workplace, we're now talking about a physical and virtual thing. And that's a really hard thing to kind of get into your head, because I know oftentimes when we speak about the workplace, and I'm sure all of you have had this experience, a lot of the focus for leaders was about getting people back to the office. I'm sure you heard that phrase. We need to get people back into the office, good or bad. And we know from studies that it's both good and bad. So there are good things about a physical involvement, and there are also good things about a virtual involvement. And I think when we talk about the state of the workplace today, I still think we're getting, most of the organizations that we work with are still understanding and learning about the best aspects of each of those elements, based on the different type of people that are utilizing those elements. So we're actually right bang in the middle of a study at the moment where we're looking at what types of tasks are actually better done in a virtual space as opposed to physical space. And with all of these things, both have good things and bad things about those. So from a C-suite perspective, we're definitely seeing a big focus on, we need people to be at least more physically together to create that connection. On purpose work, I would call it, right? So you normally have people coming together for their important weekly and monthly meetings, but particularly maybe a quarterly strategy meeting, that they're putting a real kind of emphasis on those areas as well. I'm really interested in the quiet commentary as well on there, because I think the experience of a lot of leaders I'm speaking to is exactly that as well. Oftentimes, because of, HR departments are trying to work out a model that will work for a large office, it can often be quiet with different people not in the office for different reasons. So I would say the state of the workplace at the moment for me, from our research, is definitely we're still learning about, number one, this new idea of a virtual and physical workplace, and actually then what is the role of our physical workplace now that we spent a lot of money on this thing? What does it actually mean? I will tell you there is no one answer. Some of the companies we're looking at are transitioning their office to be more customer-centered offices, more like customer, centers. Some are focusing in on wellness and mental well-being, as using a physical space to help with that. But by and large, I would say the workplace itself is now seen as a much more evolved thing. So the physical space, how do we use it in ways that align with our direction of travel, with our strategy, with our purpose? And I find that those questions weren't necessarily asked pre-COVID. It was more about having a really nice, fancy office. Now it's more about, well, how can we now use this physical asset in multiple ways that really drives our strategy?
Paula, that's interesting. He's talking about multiple ways, right? And there's not one answer, which I was very disappointed. I like nice, neat answers, but I know it's reflecting the complexity.
Mastermind answer.
Exactly.
There you go.
With a capital M. So, Paula, in terms of, it can be a scene of collaboration, it can be teamwork, it can be just a meeting space, so you can have a very minimalist objective. What do you think is the one that drives and is going to drive the office's relevance?
You're not getting a single answer.
I have to. Dean, I've got in reserve.
No, you shouldn't have given me the microphone if it was a single answer you were looking for. There's a great quote that I love from a man called Alvin Toffler, who wrote a book called Future Shock in the 1970s. He's a futurologist, and he predicted the communication and technological revolution that we're now living. And the quote was, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who can't read or write. It will be those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn." And I think that's at the essence of what we're talking about here. And that last question there, big decisions await. They're going to keep coming. We all know hybrid is here. It's a given. The ship has sailed. But the story will continue to be written, in my view. The only thing I am seeing when I think about the physical workspace in particular, there do seem to be three themes that are emerging. And I think it's a particular challenge for people working in real estate or working in your industry, and because flexibility is at the core of it. And I think the three themes are physical workspaces, and I don't need to repeat what you said is absolutely spot on around a sort of ecosystem of virtual and physical, but in the physical workspace, three themes of that workspace needing to provide a place where people can be coached, can be connected, and can collaborate. And if I look at them each individually, COVID taught us that we are a connected tribe. The impact that COVID had on our mental health is because we are a connected species. The fact that we all reacted means that we work. It's good news. We work. We need to feel connected to something. We need to feel connected to a tribe, to a purpose. And so the office space, being a hub for that connection, is really, really important. Food, and I'm not just saying it because of the environment that we're in, but food and that connection being in a form of celebration, a form of breaking bread with each other, a form of sharing content with each other is hugely important for that feeling of connection to a purpose, connection to a strategic objective, and connection to my people. The collaboration is how you can make a hybrid work environment work. And as I say, that's going to keep changing in face, but that's a challenge from a real estate point of view, and again, for all of the facility management point of view, is that spaces need to have more physical space where teams can come together on a monthly basis, or on a bi-monthly basis, on a fortnightly basis, brainstorm ideas, get a sense of each other. And then technology acts as a really good substitution for that physical connection because they've had the connection, they can feel the body language, they know what you're really thinking because they've spent time with you. She's saying no. You put your camera off on Zoom, don't you? Yeah. But because you've felt and been and you've got the sense of that individual, when you then work with them on a daily basis with Zoom, it's less of a drain. We all saw the research around Zoom drain and how that was impacting our mental health. And I think coaching is the third really important part. There's an awful lot of research out there around the many biases that we have as human beings, but one of them in the context of this that I think is interesting is proximity bias and the tendency for individuals' careers to progress much more quickly if they spend more time with their boss. And how you, as a leader, mitigate against that when there are very valid reasons for one individual only coming into the office perhaps once a month is a real challenge, but it does mean that the physical workspace needs to accommodate that environment for that one-to-one discussion of meaningful, where are you going with your career? How are you enjoying this journey? How can we take you to the next level? How can I understand what you need? And I think that's the major challenge here, is that all of this is underpinned by individual subjective realities. There's no one size fits all.
I know, I'm going to get to that one answer. Dean is going to help me. He's going to bail me out.
I'll be succinct.
Yeah. Dean, I suppose as Paula says, she's right. It's hard to, it's multifunctional. What my experience of the workplace is going to be different to yours. I might just want to go in there to meet a colleague. You might want to do something else. You might want to do something on a different day. You know, all of that sort of stuff. We are individuals, so it colours it. You're in offices a lot. You supply into them. Yep. You used to work in one. We know that kitchens can be, what would you say? can be tense places at the best of times. So you've been there in a personal sense as well. What does the modern office for you and the 2023 edition of it look like, and what's it doing? Where does it fit in?
Well, I'm going to come from a different lens. So I need people at work. let's face it. It wasn't good not being at work. But I think what I'm seeing is that work can be anywhere now. So you have to adapt. And our model copes with that. It's a flexible model. I think when I'm looking at the client sites, they've all taken very different paths, but there is a theme in that everyone has accepted that this is to stay. It's not going away. But it's how that size of office or that large organisation copes with what they're being demanded from their employees. And we talked about loneliness at home, and actually coming back into the work is not such a bad thing. So I think for us, it's our job to work with clients to bring those people in on special occasions and really make coming to work a real nice event. Which hopefully you'll taste later on.
We'll test that out. Yeah. Barry, I mean, you saw somewhere with great little poll there, right? Small but powerful. You know, the words going up there. Especially, I love word clouds because that's the simplest form of all. You can get that sentiment across. How does anyone sitting in the room now, or somebody who's a facilities manager, or HR director, or CEO, or whatever, right? Doesn't matter what role they hold, a management role of any description. How do they know if they're getting it right? I mean, how do they know? Because how do you measure? There isn't something you can take down. And of course, you can do staff surveys. I get all of that. It depends who replies and the things that can distort any set of figures. How do you know whether you're sitting there and you say, we have a successful workplace?
You said these are going to be easy questions, so let me get right here. No, I think, look, there's a couple of things. I'm going to start by answering through some of the research we've done. And I think what's really interesting is that COVID has really shone a light on poor leadership. And what I mean by that is that we did some research with leaders who were considered strong leaders working in a COVID environment, in a virtual and physical environment. Those people thrived during COVID. Those average leaders really struggled during the kind of COVID period and post-COVID, because you're working now in this new physical and virtual environment. So I think the first thing for me is that this new way of working, and this is a really important point, probably the most important point I'm going to make today, to be honest, is that this new way of working is putting an extra onus now in leadership. And it's putting an extra focus on leaders in particular as a key designer of the culture of the people that they work with. So when you ask me about, what does success look like, for me, success looks like a thriving, I'll use that word there because it's right behind me. It's a thriving culture, and you can feel a thriving culture. It's something that you can actually sense in the walls. And it's actually really interesting because we were having a conversation actually about Sodexo just at the meeting here, and it's a good example of an organisation you can feel the culture. And you can feel the positivity of the culture as well. So when you say you can't measure it, I would disagree. I think you can feel it. And for me, feeling is the best type of measurement that there is there. So I do think, though, that for particularly middle management, need to recognise now their role of culture and cultural development within their team. And oftentimes, a lot of the research we do will always highlight, a lot of people leave organisations because of their middle managers' behaviour. So 40-50% of people are still leaving. That's the main reason they leave an organisation. But then on the other side of it, are we providing the right insights and training and supports for those leaders in this new evolved role? I'm not so sure. And from our own work very recently, actually, there's definitely a gap between where we think our leaders are and where they need to be in this new world of work. So really simple things, right? And this is a really interesting conversation I've had with team leaders, Like, when should we have a physical meeting versus a virtual meeting, right? Now, that sounds like an absolutely nothing type question. But actually, when you really stand back and you kind of go, actually, what type of meeting should we do there? And how do we make sure it's clarity that there's a why behind we're coming together, right? So we're putting an extra emphasis now on people coming together, as you mentioned. And I'm not sure we're giving the leaders the toolkit at this moment in time to be able to, to really be their best within those organisations. So I think the first thing for me is leadership has now a new focus. Second thing is you can feel culture. And the third thing is really about, really focusing on that leadership and middle management layer and giving them the right tools so that they're not always seen as the bad guys, you know what I mean? I think that would be my long-winded answer.
No, it's fascinating in the sense that you're saying feeling is sometimes the first point. You'll kind of know it. It's a bit like a duck, when it quacks, what it is. Paula, I mean, do you agree with that, or do you think we need to be more scientific and throw out a load of numbers, or
No.
how do people know?
No, I mean, we built a Lust for Life that Sodexo is a big partner with us on to focus on the mental health of future generations, and we try to use statistics as little as possible because it dehumanises the fact that what we're talking about is human beings, my brother, my sister, my mother, you. And so I would agree with you. I think we've got an obsession with balanced scorecards that dehumanise the debate. I should also say, if anybody's thinking of getting a kitchen chair, these are really super. I feel like I'm going to stand up and do flying without wings any moment, but they keep you really straight. Just a piece of information there. Yeah. Just to build on what you said, though, there's a great piece of research that came out earlier this year. It was published in Forbes around the role of leadership, in particular, from the perspective that I'm particularly interested in. And it was a really interesting study across 10 countries and thousands of employees. I think it was about 400 organisations took part in it. And the conclusion from 71% of respondents concluded that their leader, their line manager, had the same impact on their mental well-being as their significant other. as compared to about 20 percentile points lower for their therapist and their doctor. So you all have more of an impact on your teams than anybody in your team that's seeing a therapist. That's a big responsibility. It's also a wonderful privilege. It's an incredible privilege. And I think for me, when you think about a thriving workplace, you've already mentioned the physical context being, you need to look at the periphery and look at the entire. I think where a lot of leaders, probably because of an obsession with the balanced scorecard and how they are measured and how they are personally motivated, don't always take a holistic view of what creates a great organizational environment. And I won't dive too deep into it, but if anybody's interested, look up a theory, a model called the job demand resources theory. And it is where organizational psychologists, after about 100 years of really trying to figure out what it is that causes people to flourish in a working environment, they've really centered very heavily on this model. And it's quite a simple model, and it basically says there are two pathways that impact your well-being in workplace. There are job demands, so that's your physical working environment, whether it's helping you, your role description, the deadlines you're being asked to meet, whether your boss is bullying you, whether there's a cohesive culture. And then there's your job resources, and they might be your personal resources. And they can be everything from a really collaborative, fun, friendly working environment that I want to come to, phenomenal technology that means I don't spend 20 minutes trying to get online, and the connection is actually really robust, and the conversation can be very fluid when I'm speaking, or a really supportive boss, right? And you can keep going. And I think where a lot of organizations and leaders, through lack of education, because I'm not a fan of sitting admiring problems or vilifying people, most people want to do right, they want to do good things, they want to leave a positive legacy. But we're not taking a holistic view, and we very often focus on job resources in a very initiative type way. And it's focused on, I will need to make you more resilient. You will be more resilient. There's something quite accusatory about that. And that's not taking leadership accountability for, is the organizational design right? Are we giving them great food when they come into work? Are we ensuring that there's a zero tolerance for bullying in this workplace? Are these role descriptions fit for purpose? Am I asking you to do 3 people's jobs? And it's only when you take that holistic responsibility that you can truly stand behind having a thriving workplace, in my view.
Yeah,
Can I just build on that, actually, because we just completed this study, hence I've got this big bloody piece of paper. The disconnect between often the organizations we looked at were actually focusing on the wrong elements of the value proposition versus what employees actually wanted. So a great example is remuneration, right? So the first thing we always think about is, geez, we're this really good person. Let's throw a few thousand euros there and hopefully keep that person. And actually, in that particular cohort, most of the people actually left because of lack of proper development. So on one hand, we're saying, it's a bit like what you're saying there, here you go, bang, bang, bang. But on the other hand, the employees are going, you're not listening. It's nothing to do with the reason I'm leaving. And believe it or not, right, only 35% of companies in Ireland and the UK actually ask why people leave an organisation, right? So I'm kind of going, if that's where we're starting from, that's a really interesting place, And for all of the talk about, the future of work and, everything is, as I call it, an optimistic bubble, we're actually still not getting a lot of the basics right, and we're doing a lot of brand work, but not the actual work, So I think just that example is a brilliant one because, even the way we're designing the value propositions for our people, you mentioned the different types of people that we have there are often totally disconnected. So it's a bit like kind of, I really need this product. That's great, but there you go. We'll take that product instead, But I need a toilet brush. No, you need a washing machine, And it's a bit like that. So I think, and that's us leaders. Leaders have a responsibility to create a value proposition.
Let me just bring Dean in.
Yeah, sorry, Dean. Excuse me.
He's
Yeah, 'cause I
feeling
just want to bring that
lonely
in.
out
Sorry,
here
Dean.
on
No, I'm good. I'm
Or
good.
maybe he actually wants me to skip him, but I'm not.
No, it's good.
He's rethinking his toilet brush strategy, aren't you?
Yeah, you're going to think about toilet brushes all day. Yeah.
The door.
when you saw those first set of answers, the word cloud, right? Lots of different words went up, sparking off all sorts of thoughts. You visit a lot of offices, you deal with a lot of, as I said, you have relationships, direct commercial relationships. Which one of those words was most interesting to you?
Unsettled, I think.
Yeah.
I think unsettled. I think what I'm seeing with clients, I'll take an example of one client that they never had a food program before, and obviously I'm going to be selling food today, so forgive me. And they were really struggling with getting the people back to work. Never had a staff cafe, never did anything. I think the best they had was a kettle and a Nescafe sachet.
And Bovril.
Yeah, and that they came across us and we started working with them. And this is a company that we wouldn't ordinarily work with. We work with a lot of tech companies, a lot of fintech. This company was definitely out of that zone. And the office started coming back at about 30 people. And they just wanted one meal once a week. And that's fine. That's what our model is. That's what we can do. And slowly, over the months, that grew. The client was on the phone and said, can we go to 2 days? Can we go to 3? And now we're at 3 or 4 days for that office, and we're also in other offices for them as well across the UK. So if you're asking, does things work? I'm not saying it has to be food, but there has to be something now for people to come in. It can't, just putting out something because it's an okay. People want more, and they want something to be excited about when they come into work. And yes, food does play a massive part in it, but there are lots of other things. I know a lot of you guys will know that you can introduce into a workplace that make it more exciting. And let's be honest, if you're getting on a train and you've got to travel 2 hours, like I do into London, there's a need to get in there. And you want to make it worthwhile while you're there and really ram-pack, sometimes actually stretch it out what you wouldn't normally have done before, and actually stay around in the evening and have a nice evening pop-up. It might be something like that.
I think, I don't know if people in the room would agree, but getting a picture of what employees are telling us, right? Because they're not telling us, as you said, one thing, they're telling us a number of different things, and then weighing those up. And I mean, we've got some survey data, which our colleague Clara supplied us with, which shows that some people are very economically focused. The inflation issue is big. Cost of living is big. Other people are lifestyle, commute focused. Other people are, as Paula says, what is the function of being in there? Why do I need to do this? What is it adding to what I do for this organisation? So we're not being sent one signal. But when you look at the quiet quitting figures, in particular, Barry, I mean, they're pretty alarming. They're pretty alarming. Now, it's a buzzword. It's a buzz phrase that we didn't know until COVID came along and created it. I'm sure it was going on long before COVID. We'd like to blame everything on COVID, as we know. But do you think we're not looking enough at what employees, the signal they're sending us, as in middle managers, owners, entrepreneurs, the people who are their bosses and managers, as Paula says, is it hard to get that picture? There's the inflation people who are talking about the economic cost of going into a workplace, and that's increasingly a problem. And then there's people that are talking about fulfillment, wellness. So there's a lot of different signals flowing through.
Yep.
Is it hard to kind of condense that all into something, and then companies can kind of work off that then?
Yeah, no, look, to the quiet quitting thing, there's a lot of research, that supports it and doesn't support it. So, but I think at the core piece for me, and we've done a lot of work on this, is this jump from job as a career to a job as an experience. And I think actually that really links nicely to food and everything else. Now, if you're now designing work as an experience, then it's no different to us designing, doing your products for your customers. We need to, recognize that the people that we're designing these interventions for need to be part of the process. I like to say, not unless you can't do something unless you have people with you on the journey. And I think one of the big things from my perspective is we need to take a much more design approach in terms of how we actually think about these types of, interventions for people. Right, so back in the day, I worked in the car industry, and the big buzzword was mass customization. We have the technology now, we have the processes now to actually create, individualized perks and benefits for each and every individual that doesn't break the bank, that will work for different cohorts. And I'll give you a really good example. We worked with an organization in the US, and they were very much, I call them two generations. One was a very young generation, and then the other one was quite an old generation. It didn't seem to have too many employees in the middle. And when we worked with both sides, it was really interesting. A lot of the younger population was really around supports to help them, at the end of the month. I know we had that conversation about, how do I manage my finances better? Food was really important because for some of those individuals, this was their big meal each day throughout that process. Now, the other cohort were a totally different, cohort. They were talking about better support for pensions, different type of working flexibility. And actually, we talked about this idea of moving towards pensions, so gradually decreasing days and using days on volunteer and charity work as well. So I think the big thing for me is that we can't just go down the same route we've always done. We have to recognize we're designing experiences for human beings. I think we do need to kill ourselves to, force ourselves to think at least in cohorts, not in bland population, and here you go, there you go, guys, aren't we fantastic? Here's our value proposition. I think we need to work with people to create those value propositions, and then we'll know what's actually important to people within that area. But here's the really interesting thing. A lot of the things that we found don't cost a lot of money. What they actually cost is focus, So there's always a thing, that's for big organizations and all that kind of stuff, but actually there's a lot of things that small organizations can do. Things like coaching, well, you mentioned, but things even like, creating special days, where people get together and food becomes the focus. Things like even, some simple wellness supports, doesn't have to be big, massive programs because they often don't work. And really just thinking like designers, the same way as we think about the products that we design for our customers, I think is the big jump that some of the leading edge companies we know are making at the moment. I think that's the real opportunity. I actually think that's really exciting, to be honest.
It is. Paula, I mean, I suppose that maybe this isn't the problem, but to me, is a lot of companies produce a standardized product, right? They produce a widget, a can of Coca-Cola, whatever. And then to pick up Barry's thing, we're not tailoring, we're almost standardizing against for employees. We're sort of saying, there's 100 people in this team, and there's 50 in this team, and this team will all do this. And as Barry says, it's so individual. The absolutely most vital issue to me might be my commute. That's everything to me, right? Or it might be, as you said, I need to get a square meal in the middle of the day for various reasons that occur to me. So how do people who are managers, HR staff, how do they tailor to individuals? Should they tailor to this? And how can they make that a success? Because I don't think enough of it's going on. We all know it's not. It's not enough, and you hear this every day of the week.
I mean, I think it is a real challenge. There's no doubt about it, because you're trying to, if you employ 2,000 or 3,000 people, that's a real range of people that sit at various stages along the employee life cycle, and it's different stages in their life. I know what I want now is very different to what I wanted at 20 from my job and many things, actually. So I think there is a real challenge in terms of and I think that's only going to get worse in Ireland in particular, where we've got real structural problems with feeding the talent pool. And we know we're going to have continued economic growth in this country, albeit at a more modest rate. And we know we've got structural problems with bringing talent. We're going to have to look in different places to bring different marginalised elements of the workforce back into the workforce to do that. So that's only going to add to the problem. But I would say two things. One is there's a lot that we do know, right? There's a lot that we do know. Most people need a purpose. So what are you doing to give people a purpose in their organisation, right? Linked to that, we now know, whether it's through dinner table democracy with your children forcing you to care or you personally caring, societal value, the impact that we're having on the planet, the impact that we're having on communities, matters so much more. Food plays a huge part in that. What is the food cycle within my organisation? How am I contributing to my community with how food is managed? Do I have a self-sustaining canteen in the place that I work? How is food waste being managed, etc.? Can I feel proud of that? Can I identify with that? And I could keep going, but you can all read the reports, right? There's a number of different things that are common. You can design to cohorts, as you say. Most brand agencies do it. They have personas, and we all know what they are, and you can tailor. But I would ultimately, to the point about don't dehumanize with stats, don't over-intellectualize. Yep. We're all people. Talk to your people.
Yeah.
And I think investment in development, and I would say this because of the work we do with the Blink Effect, investing in the emotional intelligence of leadership would be one of the biggest impacts that people could have on organizations, because that involves tuning into people, empathizing with people, understanding, and being honest when they can't have the moon on a stick, which is sometimes the case.
Dean, we talked a little bit about food there. Paul has brought it into the conversation, and she talks about a relationship with food, and it's not just a functional thing. When I started working, the soggy ham sandwich was kind of in vogue, right?
Around.
That's good to hear. That kind of reassures me. I know I'm dating myself by even talking about that concept. And I used to go down to the canteen years ago in a certain company I worked for, which shall remain names, and it was, you can have egg and chips, you can have something else and chips, and then you can have chips, right? And it was just something that was functional. It was just like go in, get it eaten as quickly as possible, and back to your workstation. I'm glad those days are mainly over, right? Mainly over. But that relationship with food, and particularly younger workers coming through who have a different relationship with people of my generation with food, what's going on there? Just tell me a little bit about what it's like, the kind of things people think about food, how important it is, what the things they're looking for, what's happening in that sort of two-sided relationship.
Well, the workforce we look after in particular are very diverse, come from many countries, but also on top of that, they're very well educated in food now. And when you put up a dish or you source a recipe or you have a certain type of style, it has to be authentic. And if it's not authentic, you're quickly out, you're not in the game. So when we're putting our menus together, there's a lot of thought that goes into it.
You say authentic, what do you mean? What does authentic mean?
Well, resourcing the dishes for its original origin, finding those ingredients from where they should be coming from, and make sure that what you're putting into the dish represents that dish in its whole self. Because there's nothing worse than me sitting down to a roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, and I happen to be in Singapore. It's not going to be quite the same.
Yeah.
But, you're never going to get absolutely 100%, but if you can just get as near to it as possible and serve it and create a buzz around the food and make it exciting for people and tasty, then you're halfway there.
And have you noticed, you're obviously working in the UK and Irish markets, have you noticed little quirks, differences in different national markets? Are we all...
So
tell us about them.
So
Say we need more potatoes, you might get a reaction. You might just get a
Mention the words
reaction.
bacon or cabbage.
I did have this kind of the Englishman telling the Irish. Anyway, so I've been coming over here quite a while, not just recently, but we have family here as well. So I understand the culture, I understand what's important. And my wife's family have actually they're a farming family over in Wexford. So drawing on that knowledge coming in, I realised what I was up against bringing fooditude into this country, that's for sure. But I think what I get when I've been out with the guys, Lord Beer obviously is absolutely fantastic. It represents Ireland in its whole self. And I think we're actually lacking that in the UK, if I'm honest. It's really something to look up to.
You'll be asked back.
Yeah, and I say I've been on some of these food dates, I call them food dates, out to meet producers. And the wonderful thing about Ireland is that everything is just so close and so near, and you can touch it, and you can see it, and you can feel it. And they're very, 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 very kind of passionate about what they're doing. And I actually had a guy I was talking to about his salmon. He was telling me about how he salts the salmon and cures the salmon, and both of us were crying about how good this salmon was. Get very emotional sometimes, but
wow, that's authentic.
yeah. So there's two guys crying at a food fair. It was very strange.
Taking a photograph. Barry, to come back to you, you've never cried over any salmon or any other fish, right?
I have cried over certain things, but definitely not salmon.
I suppose what often happens in organisations, and I've seen this myself personally, whether it's the way the building is managed, or whether it's HR practice, or whether it's just something litter has spilled on the corridor in one of the offices, there's always that somebody should do something about that. I call it the Irish Taoiseach defence. We've had a lot of Taoiseach that have stood up in the Dáil and said, they've been asked a question, they go, oh yeah, someone should do something about that. And they sort of disassociate. And we all do that in an organisation. So who's the role holder, who holds the pen, to use that old phrase? And middle managers, I know they feel frustrated because they're sort of like you over there, you're a middle manager, that's your job, okay? And they feel all the pressure. Meanwhile, their boss may be off doing something completely different, not as operational or front facing. So do you feel sorry for the kind of the middle managers in transmitting some of these things that Paul is talking about, and that they are sort of there, like, how do they develop their kind of leadership competence in this? How do they make a thriving workplace? Where do they fit into all of this? Because they're often transmitting a policy from on high. Yeah. They probably had maybe no role in the policy. Yeah. It was just handed down in an email or a PDF or something, and they then have to put flesh on that. So we do need to have a bit of sympathy with the middle manager, don't we, in this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I know we use the phrase middle management a lot, but if you think about, let's say, what I would call, a properly integrated organisation utilises all voices. We talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, which is absolutely critical in this day and age, but actually we don't often think about it from an actual including various people within the various layers within our organisation. And it's really interesting because when we asked what a more human organisation looked like to about 100 organisations, many of them said to be involved. So that's the first thing. I think the first thing is actually to involve the people that we're creating policies and pieces for, and which often isn't the case, by the way. So only about 20% of the policies that we've seen around the future work have actually involved the people that are going to actually be impacted by them. So I think that's the first thing, is actually they need to be involved so they have a sense of ownership. It's the IKEA effect. You know, if you build it together, you'll feel more ownership over it. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing then for me is, you know, Paula alluded to it earlier on, which is that, you know, that group of people are the people that translate your purpose and all this fancy stuff up here into reality. Right? And oftentimes we don't give them the ability to tell that story meaningfully. We don't necessarily give them the level of empowerment to do that meaningfully as well. So I think for me, there's an aspect here of standing back and recognizing their increased importance now within an organization, and to give them the right kind of supports as well. Now, one thing I would say to you is that, you know, we're really interested in what we call self-managing organizations. So these are companies that often do not have any managers. Okay, there's an orchestra in the US. It's a concert orchestra that doesn't have a conductor. Never heard before. The team manage themselves, and their levels of feeling of empowerment, meaning, purpose are all way higher than any other type of team. So I do think we have a role in kind of giving them more empowerment, giving them a sense of self-management, and ultimately freeing that layer up to do more.
Okay, in a minute or two, we're going to go to some final questions from you guys. If you had some Q&A we want to do before that, just go briefly to Paula. Picking up on this poor old middle manager. It doesn't make a great slogan, you know, rights for middle managers. But they're there and they're transmitting, as Barry says, the policy could be just handed to them. They may not have been involved in the formulation of it, which is your first problem. But let's just say that's baked in some cases. There's not much you can do, or it doesn't get done. What does the middle manager, how do they develop their leadership contribution to a thriving workplace?
I think the first thing we should do is eliminate the term middle management, because it just conjures this term of mediocrity. And you know, I wear sensible shoes and I sit in the office eating those soggy hap sandwiches, you know. And actually the reality is every individual that has any impact on any other individual, it's a privilege and it's a responsibility. And even if the strategy is cascaded down from David Fox and Sodexo, and you're managing a team of 4, you have the ability to influence 4 people's lives, not just their careers, their lives. And so I would say, I would build on what you've said. This is about, firstly, put your own gas mask on first and recognize the disproportionate impact that you have on other people. So if you're not feeling that you're thriving and you're flourishing and you're taking care of your own well-being, well, that's going to cascade out. And I refer you back to having more of an impact than your therapist as a leader. So put your own gas mask on first is what I would say. I would say give people a reason to care. You can create purpose in any scenario. Read the book, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Look how he found purpose in Auschwitz and it kept him alive. You have that ability to create meaning, whatever you do. Don't be afraid to challenge people. People need a challenge. They need something to strive for. And you can always create scenarios where you give people control and autonomy over their own destinies, even if it's within boundaries. And there's so much research to show that if you feel that you've got a level of autonomy and a level of self-determination, you will automatically flourish. So I personally think eliminate the term middle management, but recognize the profound impact you have on other people's lives and step up to it as a privilege would be my overarching.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Yeah. We're going to go to some questions. Okay, we've got 2 from one person and 1 from anonymous. So Krista Bell has said, how has your organisation created the natural moments of camaraderie and water cooler chats in the new hybrid world? Yeah, absolutely. Have you done this, Barry?
Yeah, we have. We've got virtual water cooler is actually what we call it.
Okay.
And then we also have what we call a virtual diversity cafe. I was told by my HR director to mention that properly. And actually, so the first one is very much around cutting across division, so people fully understand, different things that we're doing at one particular time. The other one, the Diverse Cafe, is a really interesting one because it randomizes people to come together at these particular meetings. So you end up meeting all sorts of people and all sorts of interesting stories. And the whole point of those cafes actually is literally that. It's not to talk about work. It's actually to have meaningful really cool conversations about all the mad stuff that people are really into, which I find really interesting. I'm going to be honest about it. So I've kind of, what have I found through those discussions? It actually comes back to your point you made as well, Dean, is there's amazing people in your organisation, and they're more than just the job they do. So that's the one thing that Diversity Cafe really helped, was just getting to know people from beyond bloody work. Shouldn't say that, take that out, bloody work. Okay. My CEO's watching this one. But you know what I mean? So those two things worked really, really
We are recording it.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Eep.
Let me take the second one from Anonymous, who says, a lot of experienced leaders don't understand what the younger generation just wants or needs. They find it strange, or what's this about? Paul, are we back to the sensible shoes and the ham sandwiches?
Yeah, possibly. No, I mean, I think at the end of the day, you know, intergenerational communication is actually a real opportunity here. You're right, none of us know what it is to be a 19-year-old. We grew up, you know, I grew up in a completely different environment. I was told to cop on, walk on, get over myself and keep moving. And did okay out of that, but, you know, probably spent a bit more on therapy than I'm hoping my nieces and nephews will as a result. So no, we don't instinctively know based on life experience, but we can find out by asking. And there's an awful lot of research out that will share you the kind of trends. And the human condition is the human condition. A lot of this is a reaction to cosmetic circumstance. That's easy to find out if you're willing to go and look.
Now I'm going to give this one to this man beside me. Tim Owen has asked, many locations have excellent staff restaurants, but how else can food be used to bring teams back to the office? And I have to put you under pressure of time because we're going back to David in a second.
Just make it really nice
Yes, so
and happy.
be interesting, but in brief terms.
Yeah, just make it really good. Don't do something. Is it going to be half cocked or just not great? Make it really nice. Maybe rather than trying to do Monday to Friday and every day, just make one day really good. Make it really impactful, and have those people come in and remember coming into work for the right reasons.